Hey guys, welcome to another video on my channel and I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a great day on this place that we call Earth. If not, that's also fine. Remember to take some time for yourself and maybe go get drawing and maybe try some of these tips that I'm about to show you. So I just got back from the framers. Oh, by the way, sorry for this awful quality. I just gave up with my camera because it was annoying me. Anyway, here's Rusty. And today I'm going to be showing you how I drew his ears with colour pencil and solvent. This is a really good method if you want to speed up your colour pencil work. If you're a commissions artist, you know that that's always a good thing. I'm using Zest-it solvent in this drawing and it's specially made for colour pencil artists, so that is a good thing if you're a colour pencil artist. Keep watching and subscribe if you did like it. Enjoy. So here I'm just showing you how I transfer my outline to my Pastelmat paper. What I do is I draw it out digitally on Photoshop using my laptop tablet thing, and then I transfer it using TraceDown paper in white. Just rules out all the annoying like rubbing out and stuff like that, and I find it easier to draw on my tablet, so if you want to just print out your reference picture and transfer it that way, that's completely up to you. So here I am. And I'm just, as you saw there, I got down my very first layers and now I'm putting on the first layer of Zest-it solvent. What I did in the beginning layer was just the main tones and the skin underneath that fur, the colour that skin would be. So you kind of have to imagine to an extent. And there I'm going in with the Zest-it solvent and I am just going with the direction of the fur around the edges of the ear. And then for the skin bit, which I wanted to be quite smooth, you go in circular motions, like really small circular motions. And I dip my paintbrush in the solvent every 20 seconds or so, or whenever I'm going to like a different colour area. And I tend to start on the the darker areas, and blend into the light, because you can always put highlights on top of that if you need to. And here I am going in with the second layer, and I'm putting in some really saturated colours, and I'm emphasising those highlights. Rusty had really gorgeous golden fur on his ears, and his owners said that his ears were their favourite part about him, so I had to get these right. So here I'm just darkening those shadows, as you can see, and I thought it was a bit pink, the first layer I did, a bit too saturated, so what I'm doing is I am neutralising those pink and red tones, and the complementary colour to red is green. So instead of using greys and browns, which can tend to make it look a little bit flat, you can use the complementary colour, which is the opposite colour on the colour wheel. It's handy to print one of these off if you struggle with colours, I guess. And using that complementary colour on top of the colour that you want to tone down a bit is a really nice way to go about it. Creates a really nice natural shadow tone. So I'm just going over and over again with that colour pencil and the Caran d'Ache Luminance. I'm sure you've all tried them, and they're really lovely, especially for highlights because they're so soft. And yeah, as you can see here, actually I forgot to pick up on that. I put some more solvent down and I'm going over the top while it's still wet, and you can really take advantage of doing this whilst your solvent layer is wet, because the pencils will really show up on top of that. It kind of turns into like a creamy, painty mixture, and you can easily get highlights on top of shadows doing it this way, which can be quite hard, as you probably know, with coloured pencils. I'm really reserving those highlighted areas, using a lot of saturated oranges, and starting to render the area around it just so I can get a little bit of context. I think my favourite pencils for doing this kind of method are the Luminance, because they are so creamy that they really work well with the solvent. If you're new to solvents, I really recommend the Zest-it pencil blend. It's specifically made for coloured pencils, which is really good because we're using coloured pencils, and you can use paint thinner like any ordinary solvent. I've used Gamsol in the past and that's perfectly fine, but I feel like the Zest-it tends to preserve your bright colours a bit more. When you do your solvent layer, when it dries, it is going to look a little bit less saturated and a little bit darker, but you can use that to your advantage again. This method can really speed up your work, but it can also, you can also just take a really long time with it and you can get some really good deep depthful effects. Depthful, is that even a word? Don't know. But it really is like oil painting, if you've ever used oil paints. And on these later layers, I'm using a blue Derwent pencil here. And that's just neutralising the orange tones. Because that is the opposite colour on the colour wheel again. And on this is almost the top layer now, I think, of the ear. So I'm just adding those hairs that we see coming out of that skin. And these are really easy going on top of that dark. Without kind of, because if you weren't using the solvent, it will kind of all burnish together and be a bit of a muddy mess. And, oh yeah, for the paintbrush that I use, it's literally just a really cheap, smallish, obviously you have to tailor the brush to the area, smallish watercolour synthetic brush, and that does the work perfectly. I'm not adding too many of those flyaway hairs just yet, because I've still got to put the background in, and I don't want it to look kind of stuck on. I want those hairs to go over the background. So here I'm just rendering some more of those colour depths, trying to get everything really coherent. You can actually use the solvent method just to get your base layers down. I have done that in the past. I've even used it with pastel pencils, and that it really works the pencil into the tooth of the paper, so it helps you to go over the top easier without obviously making it muddy and too much pigment on that surface. As you can see, the solvent has dried now. It dries lighter than it does when you see it wet, obviously. So you do tend to have to go back in and darken your darks, lighten your lights, blah blah blah. So yeah, at the moment I'm just reinforcing this shadow tone on this side. Because it's quite a complicated colour in here. It's kind of like a red, browny grey. And then there's the highlight hitting here, and then there's another shadow here. And then this whole bit here is in shadow. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what colours you use unless it's completely off. The tonal values matter so much more, so which lightness or darkness you use of that colour. Because we all see colour differently. Me and my boyfriend are a good example of this. He always says things are green, and I'm like, what? That's literally blue. But everyone sees colour differently. And you could draw a dog in like fully green colours and it would still look like a dog because you'd have your lights and your darks in the right places. It would just look like a green depiction of that dog. But, you know, don't... Because I see people asking me like, oh, what colour can I use for this section? What colour did you use for that? And it's not really the point. Like, if you were to just tell people what colours to use, like what colours you use, I don't really think people would get much from that, because you need to experiment and find out for yourself what works. Especially with this solvent method, you kind of have to work out what mixes well with the one next to it. I think painting, because I do some oil painting, I think that's really helped me with colour theory and which colours go together, etc. They are pretty big. So I'm just going in with some greys to calm down those colours a bit. just so it comes in handy to know your complementary colours. So like, you know, if you had red for example and then you went over it with green, that would create a really nice natural grey colour because these are complementary colours, so they'll cancel each other out. Let me just give you a little example on here. So that's the red, and then we go over with the green. This isn't very good paper to mix colours, but you get the gist. Easier demonstrated with paint, but you can kind of see there it makes a natural grey rather than just using greys, because greys can tend to lack soul, I find. It starts to look quite flat, but if you're using those complementary colours together, it can give you some really natural looking shadows and greys. So yeah, try and stay away from using blacks and just blacks and browns and stuff for your shadows, because you could actually use the complementary colour and achieve a more in sync kind of shadow. So yeah, try that out. Speeding this bit up now because I'm just doing the same thing over and over again really. All I'm making sure to do in this layer is to get those half tones down, get the correct colours in the right places, and being a bit more specific now rather than general and covering large areas. I thought I'd show you just this last portion of it in real time because you can really see how grainy it looks even on the third layer. And obviously if you weren't using solvent, it would be completely burnished by now. But you can really see the tooth of that Pastelmat, and when I come in with the solvent you'll see just how much it all smooths out. And in we come with the solvent now. As you can see, I'm just using that same small brush, and when I dip it in the thing, don't want it too saturated. I'm kind of dipping it in and then wiping off on the side, and I sometimes even like wipe a bit off on the cardboard or whatever's next to me, just so it's not fully saturated, but it's, you know, it's enough to take you a few strokes at least. And as you can see here, I'm using kind of smaller strokes than what I did for the first few layers with that solvent, because I kind of want to reserve those details a bit more in this layer. As you can see, I was careful not to blend that orange in with that lighter highlight on the right of the ear, because that's where the light's really hitting, so you want to keep that bright. My brush kind of got dry there, but I would prefer that than to, because if you put too much solvent on the brush and then put it down, you get kind of a like a waterline around the edge, which is fine because I'm going to go in with the background afterwards, but if you don't use backgrounds that might be annoying for you. But the less solvent you use at one time, the more precision you're going to get. As you can see there, I did the shadow area and then I dipped the brush back in and I cleaned off that darker pigment. And that's so that they don't run together too much. So I tend to blend in the dark part and then the light part, and then I will brush my brush off and then go in with the kind of mid-tone and then blend that together in that fashion. You'll see me in the next clip making use of the kind of half-dried solvent in this case, because I'm going to be putting his little hairs over the top of his skin at the top of the ear. I think I should have a reference picture in the top left, and you'll be able to see that. But the skin is underneath, so you really do have to draw it underneath to get that real depth and realism. I absolutely love this portion of the drawings because you can just see how creamy it goes, and that excites me. Because the pencils are like oil and wax based, it really does turn into like an oil painting feel to it. But because you've already placed that pigment, you don't have to worry about the kind of picking all the colours and stuff as you paint. Each medium has their advantages and disadvantages, but this is definitely a way to speed up your work. As you can see though, I still took a very long time on this one ear. I'm a very slow worker. But if you were a quick worker, you could probably do all of this in an hour or two. If you can dry it with a hairdryer if you're in a rush. I use a little portable heater thing, and it dries pretty fast. If you don't do that, it probably dries in about an hour, I'd say. Enough to go on top of then anyway. But at the end of the drawing, if you've used solvents, I would wait at least 24 hours before I packaged it up and sent it to the customer, just in case it rubs off. So just moving from area to area now, just picking out whatever I can see that needs a bit more blendiness. And it's really easy to pick out whether tooth is still remaining when you're doing this, because it is so smooth that anything next to it that isn't smooth looks really obvious. And I'm using fresh solvent to blend in that highlight there so it doesn't get muddy. I also use this method on, I think, the entire portrait actually. It was fur, and I used pan pastels for his body because it was mostly white. But yeah, you can pretty much use this technique for anything. Backgrounds, it really works. You can do a really nice smooth gradient background with colour pencils using the solvent. I tend to use pan pastels for my backgrounds though. A little bit quicker. But if you guys use solvent, let me know in the comments below. So I don't see many people using it, to be fair. Some people really like to just layer and layer colour pencils. I don't know, it doesn't really add up to me. I do prefer the painting kind of mindset rather than because obviously when you're layering colour pencils you have to go from light to dark. But with pastels it's the other way round, and with paint it's the other way round. So flitting between all of these mediums gets quite confusing, but I think there's a way that we can make each of them work for us. So now we are onto the detail, very last layer. I already started a little bit, I think I forgot to record, sorry. So all I'm doing here is going in with a really light yellow Luminance by Caran d'Ache, and I am picking out those tiny little hair strokes. I'm using a really sharp pencil for this. I use a Swordfish, I think it's Swordfish Icon crank sharpener for my colour pencils. Such a good sharpener. The only thing is that you need to change the blades quite a lot, but it's really good for those sharp points. So on the right side that was in highlight, I was using a really light lemon yellow for those hairs. And in the side that's in shadow, I'm using a kind of goldy green yellow. You have to pick a colour that's going to show up in front of the shadows, but not like if you were to pick up a white, it would just ruin the whole thing, it would look completely flat. So you need to pick a colour that only just shows up, just to get that texture in there. Yeah, this section is pretty self-explanatory really. This is probably what you're used to doing on your drawings anyway. We've just added a load of steps before it. This layer is probably just all about picking out those highlights and also darkening the shadows if they've been a bit lost in the layers of solvent. Really taking my time with this one, do really small strokes and zooming straight into my reference photo just to really get an idea of which direction those hairs are going in. And another important thing to note is try and avoid doing all the hairs in like a kind of uniform straight direction, because obviously in nature nothing's ever, as beautiful as nature is, nothing's ever fully perfect the way we think of perfect. It's never just in a straight formation. Those hairs are all gonna go in different directions, and you've got to remember as well, don't obsess too much about trying to get them all in exactly as a reference photo, because someone could come along and stroke that dog or animal and the hairs would look completely different. So just look at the photo and get an idea of the energy of that fur and what it's reflecting about that dog, because the direction and the craziness of how textured the fur is can really reflect in their personality. So don't obsess too much, but at the same time remember to be a bit looser than the kind of straight fur direction that we want fur to look like, kind of thing. Just using a Caran d'Ache Pablo here. I've only got a few of these Pablo pencils, but I do really like them actually. They're a nice mix between the Luminance and the Faber-Castell Polychromos. They're kind of the middle softness, but they're really reasonably priced and they're actually really nice to use. So I recommend getting a few of them. But as I've said before, the Luminance are probably the best pencils to use for this top layer. Because they're much softer than the others, which means they won't scratch off any of that layering, and they'll just really show up on top of the layers. I think this is all I have to say about this really. Yeah, I'd literally just do this until the end now, until I'm happy with it. Adding bits, taking bits away. And if I feel like I've gone a bit too sharp and added too much hair, I can always just go over again with that solvent and that will sort that out. So yeah, just speeding this section up now to show you the end stages, the last little bits of detail that I'm adding. And you'll see me in a second go over with a tiny little bit of solvent. It was just damp brush from where I'd used the solvent before. I didn't add any more solvent, but I decided the lines that I was adding looked a little bit too drastic and they were picking up a bit too much tooth of the paper, looking a bit grainy. So I just very gently brush over the top, as you can see me doing here, and that just softens it all out a tiny bit. So as you can probably see, this solvent has a lot of different uses. It's a really handy tool to have in your kit. It can also work as like if you've done something you don't really like on a portrait, you can paint over it with solvent and then go over it, and it adds a little bit more tooth to your paper. I know you can also get workable fixatives. I'm going to try one of them soon, because I'm definitely a burnisher. I just never know when to stop and I end up adding so many layers, but yeah, I'll do a video on that if I do get it. So we've come to the end now, and that's it for this video. I really hope you've got something from it. Let me know if you try solvents, let me know if you already use them, and do let me know if you found this helpful, because it motivates me to make more. My next video will be coming out shortly this week. It's going to be how to draw clothing in graphite pencils. I'm working on a human family portrait at the moment, so I thought that would be a good opportunity to make a little tutorial on that. Other than that, please subscribe so that you don't miss that video, and I hope you have a great week. See you later, guys.